Can you see the screen? Okay. Before we start this lecture, maybe we can begin with we pray based on our belief and religion. Pray begin. Enough for now. Okay, this lecture will be presented by Dr. Amelia Vidyanti from Department of Neurology, Dr. Dian Prasetyo from Department of Anatomy, and me from Department of Physiology. We will talk about neural basis of language learning and memory. After this lecture, you are expected to understand about the structure and function of brain area and signaling related to language learning and memory. You should able to define learning and memory, describe the type of learning and memory, and define synaptic plasticity, LTP, LDP, habituation, sensitization, and explain their role in learning and memory. You should also be able to identify the cortical areas important for language and their interconnection, learn the clinical manifestation of speech, language, and memory disorder. Okay. For about language and memory as part of cognitive functions, Dr. Amelia, please.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Dr. Meida. So before you learn more about what language and memory are, the first one, you need to remember that language, learning, and memory are actually part of the cognitive functions. Based on the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical of Manual Mental Disorder, version 5, there are actually 6 domains of cognitive function, comprised of complex attention, executive function, learning and memory, language, perceptual motor function, or we can also call it visual spatial, and also social cognition. But in this lecture, we will find more about learning and memory and also language. Okay, yeah, I think that's all. Next.
Okay, about process of speech and language. You should understand that language is different from speech. Language is how we communicate, how we represent and communicating information to another, and it can be expressed in a variety of ways, including gestures, writing, and speech. For speech, it's an audible form of communication, so it's built by our plica vocalis, yeah, and it will produce our sound. Okay, Dr. Pras.
Okay, so there are six items that construct the language skill. Consist of spontaneous speech or fluency, what we know as fluency. The second one is comprehension. So how we can understand what language is, naming and coding, repetition, reading, and writing. And each of these language skill has different part of anatomical structure that has a specific function for each of these skills. Next. Okay, so if we talk about language skill, we have to know about the principle of cerebral localization and lateralization. So we know that the language is a well-known example of hemispheric specialization, which in most individual language function predominantly on the left hemisphere. So some literature say that the left hemisphere is the dominant for language in over 95% of right-hander and in over 60 to 70% of left-hander. So if there is a lesion of the left hemisphere, language area solely cause a language dysfunction even in left-handed individual. Okay, next. About the center of the language area, previously I mentioned that in most individual, about approximately 95%, language-related areas are located in the frontal and temporoparietal association cortex of the left hemisphere. So there is a dominance or lateralization in the left hemisphere, which is usually contralateral to the dominant hand. Yeah? So if we talk about dominant or dominant hemisphere, so it means the dominant of language, not the dominant of what hand we use, but the dominant of the language. There were 2 major speech centers. The first one is the broadcast area, located at the Broadman area number 44 and 45. Broadband area number 44 is the opercularis part of inferior frontal gyrus, and 45 is triangular part of inferior frontal gyrus. And the second one is the Wernicke's area, which is located at the Broadband area 22, specifically in the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus. Both of this area, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, is connected by associate fiber called the arcuate fasciculus. Next. So there are so many important areas that have roles in the language networking. So not only the Broadband's area number 44 and 44, 45, and 22, but also there are some other important areas such as Broadband area number 3940, which is the highest association area. And then the Broadband area number 4142, which is the primary auditory area. It used as one of the language pathway about to understand what we hear. And then the Broadband area number 22 that has the function for association auditory area. Don't be confused about the the first and the second Broadband area number 22. Okay, so because the Wernicke's area and also the auditory association area has the same Broadband's number, yeah? But the Wernicke's area is specifically located at the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus. And then next is Broadband area number 17, is the primary visual area to receive information about the language that we read, that we see. And then its association visual area, which is the Broadband area number 18 and 19. And then next is the Broadband area number 4, primary motor area. Next, we will know what is the function of this area. And then the commissural fiber that connect the right and the left cerebral hemisphere, which is the corpus callosum. And the last is the association fiber that I mentioned before, the arcuate fasciculus. Next. Okay, Dr. Amel.
Oh, okay. So I think this is still the old version of our slide, right? Because I remember that the new one, I already deleted this one, but it's okay. Maybe this slide will be overlapped with Dr. Pra's slide, but it's actually about how our brain performs language. Especially for this one is about how we comprehend the speech. So the first one, the ears will receive the sensory stimuli, and then it will be conveyed to the auditory cortex and be converted to the Wernicke's area. And in the Wernicke's area, the sensory stimuli will be constructed and will be understood, the word by word, and also the relation among each word or the contextual concept. And then after that, it will be received as comprehension in our brain. Next.
Yeah, so maybe it will be a little bit similar with what Dr. Amelia explained. In this slide, I want to explain about how to understand or speak what we hear. So when we hear something, we have to understand the language that we hear, and then maybe next we can give response, about what we hear. For example, in this, actually it is a little bit different with the appearance in my slide, but I will explain it simply in a simple manner. So when we hear something, it will be received by our ear, left and right ear. So there will be an auditory pathway that will send the auditory information to the right and the left Broadband area number 41, 42, and 22. We know that Broadband area number 41 and 42 is the primary auditory area, and the 22 is its association area. Now, it will be different when the information already received by the primary and association auditory area. If it's received by the right Broadband area, so it will send to the contralateral hemisphere, which is the dominant language area, the left area. So the information, the auditory information from the right auditory area, it will be sent to the left Broadband area number 22, which is the Wernicke area, by the corpus callosum, by the corpus callosum. But which the auditory information that already received by the left Broadband area directly will go to the left Wernicke area. And after it received by the left Wernicke area, it will send to the highest association area, which is the Broadband area number 39 and 40, respectively. It is located at the angular gyrus and supramarginal gyrus, and it will be interpreted as a complete language comprehension. And if we want to respond by, maybe we want to respond it by speak or by writing, we can, the brain will send the auditory information or the language area that has been interpreted by the highest association area to the Broadband area number 44 and 45 to produce speech. And if we want to speak by contract our muscle, our mouth muscle or the phonation muscle, the information will send to the Broadband area number 4. Okay, next. Okay, this is a little bit similar, but the different information. The previous is auditory information, and this one is the visual information. So how to understand or speak what we read? Actually, it's the same. The visual information that received by the eye, is it the left eye or the right eye, will send to the center, which is located at the primary visual area, Broadband area number 17, and its association area number 18 and 19 by visual pathway. Now, the same with the previous explanation, the information that received by the right primary visual area in its association area will send to the left hemisphere, which is the left Wernicke area, by the corpus callosum. Specifically, in this visual information, it will send by the splenium, via the splenium. And after it received by the Wernicke area in the left cerebral hemisphere, the same with the previous, will give off to the highest, the 39 and 40 left. And then if we want to respond by speaking, we can, the brain will give off to the 44 and 45, and then to the Broadband area number 4. So it's similar with the previous explanation. Okay, next. Okay, this is about how to write or draw something. Okay, if you want to write or draw something, we use memory. We use the memory, the long-term memory that already been storage in our brain. The storage of the memory can be anywhere, anywhere in the part of the brain. So I write here is cortical long-term memory. The cortical long-term memory will give the memoric information can be to the right or the left association area, anywhere, any left any association area, but principally all the memories, it will give off to the left Wernicke area. The same via the corpus callosum, and then the pathway from the Wernicke area, the left Wernicke area, goes to the same pathway with the previous explanation. Okay, next. Okay, now we learn about the concept of the learning and memory. So for introduction, I will say that learning and memory is go hand in hand. So why? Because learning and memory, it will be like a cycle. As learning is the acquisition of new information of knowledge that will be stored, and the stored is in the shape of what we call as memory. So memory is the retention of the learned info. And if we want to use that memory, we will retrieve the memory. The retrieval is a process of accessing information that already stored in our memory. And there's no evidence that memory is form without any learning, exception for there are certain type of memory that are not learned, such as instinct or reflexive behavior. Okay, next. Okay.
Okay, this is one. Yeah, there are two categories of learning: non-associative and associative. Non-associative is when the repeated exposure to a single stimulus. For the associative, the relation of one stimulus to another. For the non-associative, there are two kinds of learning: is habituation, and the second is sensitization. And for the associative is classic conditioning. We can see this response about the connection between one stimulus to another with Pavlov experiment, or operant or instrumental conditioning with animal perform tasks. Okay, we can see about non-associative learning. So you can see in this picture how the connection between repeated response, and the repeated stimulus and the response. For the habituation, we learn to ignore the stimulus. The key is lack of meaning. Yeah, and then for the sensitization, after repeated stimuli, we form a learning. The response is intensifies. So the example of the habituation is when we hear about the alarm. And the sensitization, the example is when a mother hear the child crying in the middle of the night. When the mother still before the marriage, before she have children, the crying baby will not make her wake up from her sleep. But after she become the mother, just a slight cry from her baby will make her awake. Okay, for the associative learning, the behavior is altered by the formation of association between events. So here, before the conditioning, the stimulus is the bell. Ring the bell, so the dog will hear it. And when the dog see the meat, the response is salivating. But after the conditioning, so the researcher connect the two stimulus between bell and the meat. After hear the bell, the dog will eat the meat. So the response is salivating. But when the dog only hear the bell without the appearance of meat, the dog will also salivating. So this is the classical conditioning. So the stimulus will evoke the response with a second stimulus that normally doesn't evoke this response. For the operant or instrumental conditioning, this have a more complex neural circuit because it's involved the reward and punishment center. So we need the meaningful stimulus to have the response regarding the operant or instrumental conditioning. For example, when the animal perform a task, if the rat press the button, and then the door will open and the food will goes out from the container. So after the rat feel full, and then the rat will stop press the button. So that's the example of operant and instrumental conditioning. Okay, this is Dr. Pras.
Yeah. So continue about learning. So we have the question how the brain can learn. Kimball, 1961, he gives some definition about learning, which is the more or less permanent change in behavior which occur as the result of practice. So there are two words that we can use to explain about how brain learns. So from this definition, tell us that learning is a change in behavior. So this is the first, behavior, and the second is something that happens because we practice. So the first word that important from this definition is a change in behavior, and the second is because practice. Conclusively, we can conclude that the definition is from the learning is the process by which experience change our nervous system and hence our behavior. This change is what we call memories. This is the diagram about how can the brain learn. Yeah? Principally or conceptually, there will be an experience that we got from a stimulus, sensation, and perception, and then the experience will physically changing the structure of the nervous system, and eventually leads to altered of the neural circuits. And the altering of the neural circuit, it will be participate in perceiving, performing, thinking, and also planning. Next. Okay, this is the other diagram about how the process of the learning. So there are some process of learning consists of, the first one is the perceptual learning. The second one is the SR learning. SR learning is stimulus response learning. And the third is motor learning. There is one more learning process that didn't mention here, maybe the next slide, but I will explain this slide first. The first one in the learning process is when a stimulus is received. We name this is the perceptual learning, in which if there is a stimulus, there will be changes in the neural circuit that detect a particular stimulus. Okay, and after there is a stimulus that we detect, we will turn into the second step, which is the stimulus response learning. In here, changes in neural circuit will control a particular behavior. It will lead to the third process, which we call the motor learning. In motor learning, there will be a response, a motor response, in which this is the change of the behavior. Okay, next. Okay, this is the same explanation from the previous slide. Maybe I will only add one type of learning process, the number 4, the spatial or relational learning. This one is the perception of location of object and the relation, consists of two kind of spatial learning. The first one is episodic learning. Episodic learning, if it is when we remembering sequence of the event, and the observational learning is learning by watching and also imitating. The third, the previous third learning, I have explained from the previous slide. Okay, next. Okay, and then this is the plausible explanation about how is the brain can able to encode and memorize new info. The answer is what we call the neuronal plasticity or neuroplasticity. So neuronal or synaptic plasticity can be found in 3 kind of possibilities. The first one is changes in neuron structure, including the creation of new synapse or dendrite. The second, it also involves altering the release of certain neurotransmitter, or maybe the sensitivity of the receptor to the neurotransmitter. And then the third is when learning and memory set up changes in the pattern of electrical activity that takes place in circuit of many thousand or maybe million neurons. So that is what we call about the neuronal plasticity. Okay, next. Okay. Next is about the memory. Previously, we learned about the learning. Now it is the memory. So memory is the information that's stored in the brain as the result of the sensory experience, which cause relatively permanent changes of behavior. This is the diagram. Okay, this is the diagram about how the memory is produced. Yeah. So first, there must be an input, okay, which is the sensory input. The sensory input can be a visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, anything, yeah, from the world inside or thought and outside of the body. And then this input, it will be stored in the brain, recorded as what we call as engram. Engram is a memory traces. It will be encoded, storage, and retrieved or recall. And then next, it will cause us a behavioral changes. So this is why how the memory is formed. Next.
Okay, so the purpose already mentioned about the synaptic plasticity. So the synaptic transmission is very important to form the memory. So actually there are two types of memory, negative memory and positive memory. If there are inhibition of synaptic pathway, the brain has the capability to ignore information that the brain perceive will have no consequence. The process is called habituation. So, and the second one is the positive memory. If there are, for the incoming information that cause important consequence, such as pain or pleasure, the brain will have a mechanism, automatic capability to enhancing and storing the memory traces. The process is called sensitization. So how our brain can divide the experience as no consequence and have a consequence. There are special areas in the basal limbic region that determine whether information is important or unimportant and make the subconscious decision whether to store it or suppress it. So this is the molecular explanation about the habituation and sensitization. In habituation, in negative memory, there are progressive closure of calcium channel. So you already learned before, in the synapse, the calcium is very important to make the transmitter release from the synapse. Yeah. So if there are closure of the calcium channel, it will make the transmitter release decrease. Okay, for the sensitization, you can see here the noxious stimuli may be related to pain. It will make this neuron, this is the facilitator neuron, will make the serotonin release and then will act to the receptor. Nah, the serotonin will activate the adenylyl cyclase, and adenylyl cyclase will make the formation of the CAMP. The CAMP will activate the protein kinase and then will make the phosphorylation of protein in K+ channel. Remember, the potassium is very abundant inside the cell and it have a positive charge. So if there are phosphorylation of protein in K+ or potassium channel, it will make the potassium cannot go outside the cell. So the blockage for minute up to several weeks will make the action potential prolong. The prolong of action potential will make the activation of the calcium channel will be longer than before, and then it will make the amount of calcium inside the cell will increase. So eventually it will increase the release of neurotransmitter. So this is what happened in the habituation and sensitization. For the memories, there are three classifications in physiology, yeah. Short-term memory, intermediate, and long-term memory. Short-term memories will last for seconds or most minutes, unless they are converted into longer-term memory. Intermediate long-term memory will last for days or weeks, but then fade away. For the long-term memory, once stored, it can be recalled up to years or even in our lifetime. And there are type of memory, working memory. This is this is actually the kind of short-term memory, and we use it during the course of intellectual reasoning. And after the problem is solved, the working memory will be terminated. For example, when you want to count about these formulas, yeah, you use this way, right? Okay, and then when the result is 21, you will write the 1 and then you store the 2. Now, this number 2 is what we save in our working memory. So the result is 28 with 2 and 30 and 301. Okay, Dr. Amel, please.
Okay, we'll continue. So actually for the memory, there are basically, for general speaking, there are two kinds of memory, which is short-term and long-term memory. For short-term memory, this is actually a part of the working memory, but for the long-term memory, it can be also compressed of the two kinds, which is explicit or conscious memory. It means that this memory already, you are aware, you are conscious that you need this type of memory to be stored as a memory. So you are aware of yourself that this kind of activities will be stored in your brain. But for the implicit or unconscious memory, it means that this memory occur unconsciously. So even if you don't have any motivation to remember it, but unconsciously this process is stored in your brain. Yeah. So for this explicit or conscious memory, it can also be separated into two: episodic and semantic memory. Episodic memory means all the events that occur or happen next to you. So it can be from the any events or your biography. So anything happen related to you or around you, so that will be stored as episodic memory. But for semantic memory, it will be like in the form of general knowledge or the fact about the world. So for example, the name of the president, the first president in our country, for example, like that. And then for the implicit memory, it can be priming. So it means the memory that needs to be primed for. So it involves the activities that needs repetition. And then the second one is procedural, or sometimes we can call it like muscle memory. It means that this memory can be stored because you do this thing habitually, such as when you riding a motorcycle, you know how to brake, brake the motorcycle, or how to gas. Yeah. So you learn how to do or how to perform the activities related to your muscle. Yeah. Or sometimes we can also call it muscle memory. Okay. Next.
Okay, Dr. Amel already explained about the explicit and implicit memory, but from another reference, another book, maybe you read about the declarative memory. So declarative memory is same with explicit memory, and the skill memory is same with the implicit memory. The explicit memory, how we memorize about various detail of an integrated task, such as memory of an important experience. For the implicit or skill memory, it is the memory associated with motor activities of the person's body. So we call it skill, yeah. And activated instantly based on previous memory. For the explicit memory, it requires conscious recall, but for the implicit or skill memory, it doesn't require conscious recall. The explicit memory will store in the association area of the cerebral cortex, and for the skill memory, it will be stored in the basal nuclei, cerebellum, and premotor area. So for the short-term memory, actually what happened in our neuron, there are continual neural activity resulting from nerve signal. We call this as a circuit of reverberating neuron. So reverberate. And if there are some presynaptic that facilitate the track, so it will last for seconds up to several minutes. But if the inhibition from this neuron is more adequate from versus the facilitation here, so the memory we will forget what we remember in just several minutes. For the intermediate long-term memory, it will last for many minutes or even weeks. So there are some temporary chemical or physical changes in our synaptic transmission. Okay, so functional changes, and it's related to neuronal plasticity. Number one, there are increases in physical release site for secretion of transmitter substance, and there are an increased number of transmitter physical release, and there are increase in the number of presynaptic terminal, and there are changes in structure of dendritic spines that permit transmission of stronger signals. So this one, the facilitator neuron, serotonin modulatory neuron, it will make the CA-MP and then PKA, and PKA will facilitate glutamine release. But also, if the if the stimulation repeat, and then the PKA also influence the gain expression, and then it will stimulate the synapse growth. So like this one. Okay. If we want to make the memories stored longer in our brain, so the memory need to be converted into a long-term memory. So we can recall it weeks or years later. So the term is consolidated. The short-term memory, if activated repeatedly, it will initiate chemical, physical, and anatomical changes in the synapse. This process requires 5 to 10 minutes for minimal consolidation, and maybe 1 hour, because for the strong consolidation, it requires synthesis of mRNA and proteins in our neuron. So you can see here, this is some axon, and this is there are 3 color, the yellow, blue, and green one. You can see here, this is the neuron A, neuron B, and neuron C. This is in original situation. So there are no connection between the blue one and the yellow one. But after we learn, after we have a new experience, you can see there are new synapse form and make the blue one connect with the yellow one. Now, after the prolonged experience and after we train more repeatedly, you can see here the old synapse will be eliminated, and it will make the blue one will not connect with the neuron A. And the new synapse will strengthen it. We can see the synapse is bigger here. What happened if the experience remove? New synapse will retain, but weaken it. But after we repeat the experience again in form of real learning, we learn again, and then the new synapse will strengthen it again. Okay, this is what happened in our brain. Okay, Dr. Pras.
Yeah, so this is a diagram to simplify the general model of the memory. Atkinson and Shrivin proposed this general model of memory formation, storage, and also retrieval. So, like explained previously, to produce or to form the memory, short-term memory or long-term memory, first we need a sensory input. This sensory input will form the memory sensory or sensory memory. This memory, this kind of memory, is only lasts up to seconds. Now, the sensory memory, it will be transferred into what we call as a short-term memory. The short-term memory is only lasts seconds to minutes, and short-term memory can be rehearsal or repeat, cyclic, and it can be transferred into the next kind of memory, which is the long-term memory. This long-term memory can last hours, days, weeks, months, or maybe a lifelong. And this long-term memory, it can be retrieved into a kind of a short-term memory, for example, working memory. Now, in this kind of a general model of memory, there are two types of encoding, encoding from sensory memory to short-term memory, and then from short-term memory to long-term memory. There are two types of encoding. The first one is what we call as shallow encoding, and the second one is what we call as elaborative encoding. Shallow encoding is a procedure for transforming something a person see, hear, think, or feels into a memory. So because it's shallow, it will only convert the sensory memory into the short-term memory. It will be different with elaborative encoding, in which it will convert the short-term memory by rehearsal or that previously repeated into long-term memory. Next. Okay, maybe we can skip this slide first. Okay, next. Okay.
Dr. Amel.
Oh ya, maaf, ini saya sambil double zoom. Oke,
Oh ya.
baik, sorry. So for the next one is related to the nature of the memory. So basically the memory refers to the ability to retain and retrieve information. And it also can give individuals a framework through which to make sense of the present and the future. And then it also plays a crucial role in the teaching and learning process. And there are three main processes that characterize how memory works. The first one is storage. And the second one is the first one is the encoding, the second one is storage, and the third one is the retrieval. Next.
Dr. Pras.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So this is the basic process of memory already mentioned by Dr. Amel previously, which is consists of three processes. The first one is encoding. The second is storage. Storage info is maintenance of materials, and the third is retrieval of info, or we can also call it recall. Nah, previously, I already mentioned that the memory is stored as what we call as engram. So engram is a pattern of connection constitute the brain record of the event, or is it the pattern of neuron connected through activation at the same time? Or in a simple manner, we can also call it engram is a particular pattern of neural activity that holds a memory. Okay, next.
Yeah, okay. So the second, about the encoding process, actually, it's also similar to what the process said. So in this process that we need to put the information and like convert it into the form in the brain so that it can be coded and be stored for the next step. And the type of encoding, actually, this is basically the type based on the sensory or the stimuli that enter the brain. So the first one is the acoustic encoding. It means we encode any sound-related information. So for example, the sound of the music or the sound of your teacher and etc. And the second one is the sensor encoding related to the visual simulation. So in this type of encoding, we encode any information related to the image. And also in this type of the encoding process, any words that have mental image, such as car, dog, or book, are much easier to recall than other words that actually only have abstract meaning. For example, like truth or like belief, like that. Yeah, or any words that only have image of value, not the concrete mental image. And then the third one is the semantic encoding. Actually, it experiences by their general meaning. And it is the most effective form of encoding compared to the acoustic and visual ones. And it actually refers to attaching meaning to information so that it will be easier to recall later. So it's actually for the semantic encoding process, it related to the process of the definition or the comprehension or the meaning about the words. Yeah. Okay, next.
Okay, so this is the type of the encoding that I previously mentioned before. It consists of two types of encoding, shallow encoding and elaborative encoding. And this is how the shallow encoding is performed. For example, repeating info to yourself, yeah, for example, a row number. So this is actually a part of our working short-term memory, in which we keep info in short-term memory long enough to evaluate content. It will be different with elaborative encoding, in which in order to encode incoming information into long-term memory, we can associate or connect the incoming info with something already in our memory, so it will become meaningful. So that is the difference between the shallow and elaborative encoding. Next.
So the codification of memory, when we have a new memory, the brain will codify it into different classes of information. So the brain will compare for the similarities and difference between the new memory and the old memory. So just like in our computer and laptop, we have a folder, and then we have we make a different folder for different information. And then we will be able to search the memory at the later date. Okay, Dr. Amel?
Yeah, for the second process is related to the storage. So in this process, our brain maintains the information and it will be kept over time. So in this type of process, the memory will be converted to long-term memory, either episodic, procedural, or semantic memory. Next.
Okay, so this is how the memory is stored. Yeah? Actually, to store explicit or implicit memory, which is part of the long-term memory, we have this important structure, yeah, which we call formatio hippocampi. So the formatio hippocampi or hippocampal formation is located in the medial part of the temporal lobe. It consists of some structure. You can read it by yourself. It consists of a hippocampus, and then the dentate gyrus, gyrus dentatus, and then subiculum, and then maybe area entorhinal or Bradman area number 28, and also indusium griseum also from the formatio hippocampi. But principally there are three structures that form the hippocampal formation, which is the hippocampus, dentate gyrus, and also subiculum. Next. Yeah. So this is type of the storage of the implicit memory, the procedural memory. The procedural memory will stored in the cerebellum and also amygdala. And then be careful with working memory, because it's different with procedural memory. So you know previously that the working memory is part of the short-term memory. It will stored in the prefrontal cortex. So it's different between the procedural memory and working memory. Okay, next. Yeah. So this is the diagram that show the importance of hippocampus or formatio hippocampus. Previously, we know that we have the information from the association area, maybe the unimodal or polymodal area, that will store in the association area. Nah, the importance of the hippocampal formation is for consolidation. Yeah, so the consolidation is memory forming, which we transform the short-term memory into the long-term memory by the mechanism of reverberating circuit, or also what we call as long-term potentiation. So this is the importance of the formation hippocampi, consists of what I mentioned before. Next. Okay, so this is only where the kinds of memory is stored. For example, the procedural memory, it will be stored in the cerebellum, or also its component when to store is also basal ganglia. Next. And for the episodic memory component, remember that episodic memory is a part of the explicit memory, long-term memory. It will be stored from the cortex cerebri and then hippocampus, and then it will store at the frontal lobe. And for the semantic memory is also part of the explicit memory. it will be also stored in the frontal lobe, but with different pathway. So from the cortex cerebri, it will goes to the temporal lobe and then to the frontal lobe. Next.
So this is the resume about the place in our brain for the declarative or explicit memory, the semantic fact. Just like we talked about memory in this morning, yeah, with Dr. Jun. So the semantic or fact is safe in the lateral and anterior temporal cortex and the prefrontal cortex. And for the episodic or even, it will be safe in the hippocampus, medial temporal lobe, and neocortex. For the non-declarative or implicit memory, for procedural skills and habit, just like Dr. Pras mentioned before, it will be safe in the cerebellum, the striatum, and motor cortex. For the priming and perceptual, safe in the neocortex. And for the associative learning, it will safe in amygdala and cerebellum. And non-associative learning, it will be safe in reflex pathway. So actually, the memory is not only stored in the cerebral cortex, but all of the component in our nervous system can have memory because when we have a synaptic, so it can be modified. Okay, and Dr. Amel?
Yeah, okay. For the third process about how memory works is related to the retrieval. In which it is process of recalling the information which is stored in the memory. So for this retrieval process, actually there are two kinds. The first one is recall process. So in this recall process, the information will be retrieved without much help. For example, if you are given the question related to essay question, or like any question that you don't have any clue or any multiple choice inside. And then the second one is the recognition process. It means you can retrieve the information, but with the help of some clues. For example, if you are given the question, the multiple choice question, and with this kind of question, you can be recall, or you can retrieve the information because you already given the clue. Yeah, even though maybe it is not a strong clue, but you can still have some insight about that. And then for all this process, the recognition of visual recognition has the highest accuracy, about 90%. So it means if you try to learn or memorize something, being visualize or any image that can help you perform better memory, it's important. So I think it is important also that you need to know how to address the memory based on your visual pattern or visual recognition. Okay, next.
So there are some conditions if we want to transfer our memory as a long-term memory. So you need to rehearsal. So the repetition is the key, yeah. And then attentions, full attention, and then highlight important features. And then you have to wide awake, and then prevent mental fatigue. So this is the condition if you want to transfer memory to the long-term memory. Okay, this one is half cell assembly and how the memory storage in our brain. So in this one, you can see how our neuron have a connection. So this one is reciprocal connection. This is the external stimulus. When we have the stimulus, either from our staff or from the external stimulus, it will activate the cells. And then there is the reverberating activity. And then even though the stimulus is removed. So there are some modification, strengthened of reciprocal connection here. And then if we have, after learning, if we have stimulus, even though the stimulus is not complete, so we can activate this circuit. So this one, even though we only activated this one for cell, and then it will activate the whole system. Okay. Dr. Pras?
Maybe Dr. Amel, this one.
Oh, Dr. Amel, sorry.
So for the next one, actually, it's like a summarize of the how memory pathway is. So for example, if you have any image or related information related to the visual process, then this visual information is first routed through the thalamus to the visual area of the cerebral cortex or the visual primary area. And then from this visual area, it will be delayed, it will be not delayed, it will be like relay to the frontal lobe. Yeah, from the first one, it will be relayed to the frontal lobe, in which in this frontal lobe, it will be converted as a short-term memory. Yeah, after you gain the information from the visual stimuli, and then it will be driven to the frontal lobe, and it will help as a short-term memory in this type of process. And then after that, the next one, from the frontal lobe, this information will be stored as a long-term memory, but before that, it needs to be relayed to the hippocampus. So in this hippocampus, the process of the production or the short-term memory production will be halted in this process. So it means this hippocampus plays important role for maintaining or for producing the new learning ability or new learning memory process. And then it can be held for weeks or months in hippocampus, and then it will be transferred to the area of the cerebral cortex where it was originally processed for long-term storage. For example, if the stimuli is a visual stimuli, then it will be relayed to the visual area for storage of the long-term memory process. But if the information is related to the auditory stimuli, then it will go to the cortex that have the function as auditory cortex. Yeah, so the long-term memory can be stored in any cortex related to their function, not only in the visual cortex, but it can also in the auditory cortex or maybe in the other sensory cortex based on each function itself. And then it will be kept in there for long term, it means for years. And if you need to recall this information, so you need to convert this long-term memory into what is called long-term working memory. So at the time you need this kind of memory to be activated, then that time is called the working memory. So this long-term memory will be retrieved and go to the frontal lobe where it will be held there as a working memory. And then you can use that memory for that activity. Yeah, okay, next.
Okay, how our neuron actually respond in the learning during our first few weeks or months or in our new life as a newborn. Various part of brain produce many new neurons that sends out numerous axon branches to make connection with others. If the new axon failed to connect with appropriate neuron or maybe a targeted cell such as muscle or gland cell, the new axon will degenerate within a few weeks. So the number of neuronal connection is determined by specific nerve growth factor released from the stimulated cell. After the axon is degenerated, the entire neuron that sending out the axons will eventually disappear. So the term use it or lose it is really connected with our neuron. In some experiment, if one eye of newborn animal covered for many weeks after birth, neuron in the cerebral visual cortex will degenerate. The covered eye will be partially or totally blind for the remainder of life. So you should use your neuron if you want the neuron still alive for the rest of your life. Yeah, even though maybe some condition will make our neuron degenerated. Okay, Dr. Pras.
Yeah. So there is a terminology called long-term potentiation. So maybe there will be a question how the synaptic is strengthened, yeah, to produce short-term memory and then long-term memory. This is what we call the long-term potentiation. The definition is this is a process whereby the synaptic strength is increased when specific afferent input to the hippocampus or excitated in a paired manner. So in the right picture, you can see that inside the hippocampus, there will be a reverberatory circuit. So reverberatory circuit is like a connection between one nerve with another nerve inside the hippocampus, in which one nerve will excite the other nerve, and then vice versa, going on and on and on and on. This is what we call as a long-term potentiation inside the hippocampus. That's how the memory will formed from the short-term sensory to short-term and then to the long-term memory. Next. Okay, this picture only show that inside the hippocampal formation, there will be an internal circuit, yeah, interconnected with another structure, for example, the entorhinal cortex, or maybe another structure called subiculum. Basically, inside the hippocampal formation, there will be an interconnected circuit, yeah, with another structure outside the formatio hippocampal that we call the reverberatory circuit. This is the concept or the basic concept of the long-term potentiation. Okay, next.
This one maybe you can read it after the class, yeah. So the LTP it will use the NMDA receptors that activated by simultaneous activity in presynaptic and postsynaptic neuron. For the picture A, you can see here the glutamate. Yeah, glutamate will make the NMDA receptor. It will make the MG plus. Yeah, will go and not block the NMDA receptor. So you can see here, yeah, after the glutamate bind to the side of the receptor, it will make the NMDA receptor open and allow the calcium enter the cell. So if the glutamate, if the calcium enter the cell, and it will trigger and enhance the synaptic effectiveness. So this is the mechanism of LTP. Yeah, this is before LTP induction. Yeah, and after and during LTP induction, you can see here this dendrite, yeah, this spina dendritic will undergo amplification. So amplification, the AMPA, yeah, AMPA will goes to the membrane, yeah, and then after the LTP inductions, the cell will have more AMPA receptor. So it will allow the flow of the calcium in the synaptic dendrite. Okay, if we have LTP, we can also describe about the LTD, long-term depression. So this is when our synapse decrease in effectiveness. Consequence is loss of AMP. You can see here, this is the axon, yeah, from the, this is undergo strong NMDA receptor activation, and this is weak NMDA receptor activation. This one have more AMPE, and this one have less NMPE. So remember, at the neuromuscular junction, the loss of postsynaptic receptor also stimulate the physical retraction of the presynaptic axons, just like what I mentioned about term lucid or lucid before. Okay, Dr. Pras.
Okay, so this is the conclusion, yeah, the diagram that show the conclusion about the long-term potentiation. Basically, inside the hippocampus, yeah, we know that after we receive a learning experience, okay, it will cause there will be a reverberatory electrical activity that if it's long enough, it will cause a structural and metabolic changes that already explained by Dr. Meida. The structural and metabolic changes, it will cause a process or become the basic of what we call as consolidation. So from short-term memory, it will transform into the long-term memory. Okay, next.
Okay, what is the role of hippocampus and memory consolidation? From the hippocampus, it will have connection to the neocortex. This is the normal condition. In a standard model, first we will have the connections between the hippocampus and neocortex, and then the neocortex will have interconnection. And eventually, after we have memory consolidation, we only relate to the connection in the neocortex. So this is the standard model. For the multiple traces model, you can see here there are the green one and the red one. Yeah, there are the interconnection between hippocampus and the neocortex, and from different experience. For example, the green one was activated by the visual memory, and then the red one is activated by the maybe auditory memory. So this is about the connection between hippocampus and neocortex. Okay, so the corpus callosum. You already learned the corpus callosum is like a bridge. It will make there is a bidirectional neuronal connection between most of cortical areas in our two cerebral hemisphere. The anterior commissura connected the anterior portion of the temporal lobe, especially amygdala. So the function is to make information stored in the cortex of one hemisphere available to the corresponding cortical areas of the opposite hemisphere. For the anterior commissura, the two halves of the brain have independent capabilities for consciousness, memory storage, communication, and control of motor activities. So the corpus callosum is required for the two sides to cooperate cooperatively. The anterior commissura will unifying the emotional response of the two sides of the brain. For the intercortical transfer of memory, there are some experiments in the monkey, monkey with corpus callosum and optic chiasma section. So one eye covered, and then when the right eye covered, and then the left eye see the object. After it, the left eye is covered, and then the right eye see the object. And then the monkey cannot recognize the object. But how about only the optic chiasm section? And in this condition, the monkey will respond to the visual stimuli, even though the eye is closed. If added the section of anterior and posterior corpus callosum, there are no transfer of memory. So from this experiment, it concludes that corpus callosum need for the communication and cooperative work between the two hemispheres. And for the anterior commissura, it's important for unifying emotional responses between hemispheres, especially amygdala. Okay, Dr. Amel.
Okay, for this section, I will talk about the clinical manifestation of speech, language, and memory disorder. Next. So for the disorder of the language, it can be comprised of some kind. The first one is aphasia, where it is a quiet disorder of language due to the brain damage. And the second one, it can be also dysarthria, where it is actually related to the speech. So the motor apparatus speech have impaired. That's why it can be can have a condition called dysarthria. And then there are another disorders related to language disturbances, and it especially related to the developmental process. And usually it will be accompanied by the learning disabilities. And then the other one is the paraphasia. I will talk more about that later. And then another disorder like alexia, apraxia, and agraphia. Next.
Okay, maybe we can skip this slide because it will be the same with what Dr. Amel will explain in the next slide.
Okay, so for this slide, it's related to the aphasia syndrome. So for aphasia, it means the disorder of the language. So for aphasia, it actually can be comprised of some kind of aphasia. The first one is Broca. Broca aphasia is related to the fluency, the motoric process. So in this case, the patient cannot produce any speech. Yeah, maybe she can still speak some word, but not all the full sentence. Or even if they cannot speak at all, any speech, any word at all. So it means the fluency or the motor system related to the language is impaired. And in this kind of Broca aphasia, the comprehension still intact, so they can still understand what others say, and they can still do any or perform any activities instructed by the doctor. Yeah, so they have no impairment in the process of comprehension. And the location of the lesion is in the Broca's area. Yeah. And then the second one is the Wernicke's aphasia. In this condition, the fluency is like more or pronounced. It means they can speak fluently, even more fluently, but the meaning of their sentence is not correct to what the speaker asks. For example, they cannot comprehend what the other said, so they can still answer, but what they answer, it will be not related to the question. So in this case, the motor system or the motor related to the language process is intact, but the comprehension, which is located in the Wernicke's area, is impaired. So in this case, I will give you next example in the next slide. And then for the other one is, back, please back, yeah. And then for pure motor speech disorder, this is actually the pure articulation disorder. So the location of the lesion is related from the motor cortex. And then pure word deafness, it means that there is a disturbance of the spoken word, the comprehension, and also the repetition can be impaired. And actually the lesion can also be located in the input tracts from the auditory cortex to the Wernicke's area. And for the transcortical motor and transcortical sensory aphasia is actually the relatively, because I think you already remember, or maybe you still remember, there are 6 kind of language process, right? The first one is the fluency. The second one is the comprehension. The third one is the repetition. The fourth one is the naming. 5 is reading, and 6 is writing. So it means if there is any impairment in either one of these 6 category, it can be related to fluency, comprehension, naming, repetition, writing, or reading. So it means this patient have aphasia. So for this transcortical motor and sensory aphasia, they can still repeat the question or the information. Yeah. For example, if your teacher says some sentence, then you will be asked to repeat what they say. So this patient can still repeat what they say, but they cannot comprehend what the meaning of the sentence, and they cannot give any proper response due to the fluency is impaired for the motor one, or due to the comprehension is impaired in the sensory one. But for the repetition is intact. And then for the other contradictory to the transcortical aphasia, for conduction aphasia, the repetition is impaired. Yeah, so it means the patient cannot repeat what others say, but they can sometimes understand or can also have some fluency, but they cannot repeat for what they say, what the others say. So in this condition, the conduction aphasia, the lesion is located in the arcuate fasciculus, where it's a fiber connected the Broca area and the Wernicke's area. Next. Okay, for the other aphasia, there is one called anomic aphasia. So in this case of aphasia, it's related to the patient cannot name any object. It's related to the naming process. So in this case, if the examiner of the doctor asks the patient to name what kind of object it is, so they cannot answer it because they don't know what the name of the object is. But the repetition and comprehension is still intact. And in this case, the lesion is located in the inferior parietal lobe or connection with the perisylvian language areas. And the most severe form of the aphasia is the global aphasia. In this case, all 6 categories of the language are impaired. So they cannot understand any sentence, any meaning of the meaning of the sentence. They cannot speak fluently. They cannot read, they cannot write, and they cannot repeat. So all 6 categories of language are impaired. And the lesions are located in the multi-site area. It can be multiple from the perisylvian language components. Okay, for the isolation of language, I think it is the more advanced, so I think you don't need to learn this. Next. So for the paraphasia, it means that the utterance or the speech that is produced is have some impairment in either the literal or the phonemic. For example, if the patient wants to say toothbrush, they cannot say toothbrush, but rather they say it toothbrush. So the literal or the letter is changed to another letter. Or if they want to say television, instead they say the television. So it means the letter or there is a change in the literal context. So it's called literal paraphasia. And for neologism, it means the patient totally changed one word to another new word that we cannot understand. For example, refrigerator, but they said chanclas that don't have any meaning at all. That's called neologism. And then for verbal or semantic paraphasia, it means they change the whole word into the new word, but still this new word have some meaning. For example, if they want to say chair, they say table instead. Or if they want to say like spoon, they say fork instead. So sometimes the other words is their like supplementary words. So the other supplementary words that will be spoken instead the true word. Or sometimes they will say teapot, but instead they say cranberry. And the other one is paraphasia perseverative. It's almost similar with the verbal one, but this one is like the supplementary one. For example, the 2 words that cannot be separated. For example, like a toothbrush. It's not that cannot be separated, but the other 2 words that have somewhat similar shape. For example, fork and toothbrush, they have the same what's called holder, like similar holder, so that sometimes they confuse whether it's toothbrush or fork. So they will change it interchangeably. Next. So for example, this one, this is a picture that being used in the examination of in IHSS, National Institute of Health Stroke Scale. Actually, it's being used for stroke patient to examine their language function, whether they have aphasia or not. So in this picture, the patient is asked to explain what happened in the picture. Next. For the patient with Broca aphasia, they will try to explain water dripping, boy, girl, okay, mother, like that. So there will be any halt process, any difficulties to speak out the words, even the simple one. So but what they speak, what they say is actually still relevant with the pictures. So they still have intact comprehension. Boy, girl is they are in the picture, and also there is a mother there, and also actually the cookie here means the boy and girl wants to reach out the cookie. Yeah. So what they say is still relevant to the picture, but they just cannot speak it fluently. And then next. And for patient with Wernicke's aphasia, it means they cannot understand what the picture says, but they have fluency to say what they want. So for if the patient is asked to describe that previous picture, then they will remember, they will speak anything that they want. For example, in here, in this case, the patient will say, "That's of family on my own," and then the clinician will try to limit the sentence, because if not, then the patient will like have too much sentence that is not related to the picture. So the clinician will ask, "Okay, do you have a large family? Do you have a big family?" And then the patient will respond, "No, yes, well, there's 3, 4, or all told, but we only see basically, it is actually basically, but sometimes the letter will be missed. So they instead they say basically, but they just say basically. Basically once of a time at home and 2 of them, blah, blah, blah. So it is not related to the question. There will be so many sentences like circumstantially. So it will be smoothly spoken, but it's not related to the question. And then the clinician tried to limit it again, to limit the sentence again by asking, "They're not at home at all," once. And then the patient will say, "Just one at home." And then it will goes to, I don't know what you call it, forgetting. And Kathy, she's a married man and has a daughter at home. So it means it's not related to the previous sentence. So in this case, the patient has fluency, but what they say is not it's not comprehend with the meaning. Next. And the other one is pure alexia. It means that the patient can write but cannot read. They cannot read words or letter. And in this case, usually it can be accompanied by the hemianopia in the right visual field. And the lesion can destroy the visual cortex of the left hemisphere and also damage the splenium of the corpus callosum. And in this case, the Wernicke's area is intact but isolated from visual input, so it cannot receive any sensory information from both the hemisphere, especially the visual area. Next. For the pure agraphia, it means the patient cannot write. Yeah, so in this case, the damage is located in the left angular gyrus. So they cannot write, but sometimes they can still read, but not smoothly. They cannot, in this case, they can sometimes accompanied by alexia. So sometimes alexia with agraphia or alexia without agraphia. Yeah, so agraphia can be as a single disorder, but it can also be as a complex disorder with the alexia. Next. And for the disorder of the memory, so there are some kinds, but actually it can be also separated into 2 kinds. If we talk about the disorder related to the brain injury, so the first one is amnestic syndrome. Yeah, in this case, this amnestic syndrome only happen if there are some injury in the brain. Yeah, either the traumatic brain injury or post-surgical injury. Yeah, so in this case, the amnestic syndrome means the patient cannot have the ability to make new memories or to recall information stored before. That's why this amnestic syndrome is divided into anterograde and retrograde amnesia. The amnestic syndrome mainly affects long-term memory and largely spare the short-term memory. Yeah, next. For the anterograde amnesia, it means the patient is enabled to form a new explicit long-term memory for events following the brain trauma or brain surgery. So for example, in the graph here, you can see that after the time of the trauma, until today or the day when the patient is being examined, the patient can still remember what happened to him after the birth until the time before the trauma. But from the time of the trauma until the day or the day of the examination, she cannot make new memory. So if, for example, there is a traumatic brain injury caused by the accident, after the accident, the patient was brought to the hospital, and then in the hospital, she cannot remember what happened next. She can just still remember what happens before the accident. For example, before the accident, she tried to go to her friend's home to do some like homework or maybe hang out. But after the accident, she cannot remember anything. So it's called anterograde amnesia. And for the second one is retrograde amnesia. It means there is a disruption of the memory for the past, especially the episodic memory. So, for example, from the graph, you can see here that before the trauma, anything happens before the trauma, the memory relies in this time, during this time, will be impaired. But the memory formed after the trauma until the day of the examination is still intact. Yeah, for example, the same patient after the traumatic brain injury accident, she cannot remember what happened before the accident. So if being asked, where do you want to go before the accident? She cannot answer it because she cannot remember. But the event occurring far before the injury, for example, after the birth, she can still recollect it. Yeah, but time during or before the trauma, she cannot remember it. And for memory, new memory, or anything happen after the trauma, she can still easily make the memory. So she can still remember what happened after the trauma, after she was brought to the hospital, for example. Next. And the other types of the memory impairment is related to the generative process. If the previous one is related to the process of like acute process, for example, traumatic brain injury, accident, or the surgery, brain surgery. But in this case, this is the memory impairment related to the degenerative process. We call it the memory dysfunction in elderly or memory loss. Yeah, in this kind of memory loss, it can be happen in the elder patient, but sometimes in younger patient can also happen. But the etiology or the cause is much more clearer. Yeah. Next. I will give you the example next. Yeah, this is the manifestation of the memory loss in the degenerative process. For example, the elderly patient sometimes being forget to remember the bill, to pay the bill, for example, or she can easily forget the name of the neighborhood or the location of the car keys, for example, or anything related to the memory impairment. Yeah. But other symptoms such as depression, confusion, personality change, or difficulty with activities of daily living may also be present, depending on the cause. Next. So this one, the most common cause of the memory loss in the elderly. The first one is AAMI, or age-associated memory impairment, or in the old textbook, sometimes they call it BSF, benign senescent forgetfulness, or sometimes they can also refer to age-associated cognitive decline. Second one is mild cognitive impairment. Third one, dementia, and the last one is depression. Next. So for the AMI, or age-associated memory impairment, it refers to the worsening of memory that normally occurs with aging. So this is actually a normal condition in which aging people tend to forget some things after they reach some period of time. So for example, a patient cannot remember where they place the key, the door key, for example. But if they are given some time to recollect the memories, they can still remember, oh yeah, I remember that I placed the key on the top of the shelf, for example. Yeah, so if they are given the sufficient time to think and recollect or try to remember the missing point, yeah, the one that they cannot remember, so they can still easily remind it. Yeah, so this one is actually part of the normal life. Next. The second one is MCI, or pre-dementia state. in this kind of the cognitive impairment is actually they have a memory loss and slow memory retrieval. So if they are given sufficient time to retrieve the information, they still find it difficult to remember it. Yeah, so it will affect the short-term memory first. For example, the patients have trouble remembering recent conversation, or maybe remembering the relative's name, or the location of the commonly used items. And however, the memory for the remote event, for the long-term memory, is still intact, and also the attention. And for this kind of memory impairment or mild cognitive impairment is actually only impairment in one or more cognitive domains, and it's not severe enough to affect the daily living. So it means the patient, even they have difficulties to remembering something, but they still have normal activity of daily living. So yes, they can still have normal interaction with the neighborhood. They can still work normally. They can still use the public transportation or pay the bill. So this kind of memory impairment will not interrupt the daily living or daily function. And up to 50 patients with MCI will develop dementia within 3 years. Next. And then next. Next, yeah, okay. And this one, dementia is the most severe form of memory impairment in elderly. So in this case, there are impairment in 2 or more cognitive functions. For example, there is memory impairment plus executive. It's like this executive function. It means executive function impairment, or there will be also impairment in other domain of cognitive function. For example, there will be loss of attention or loss of the visual spatial skill, and it will be severe enough to interfere their activities of daily living. Yeah, for example, the patient may have difficulty with finding words or naming objects. It means aphasia. And also they will have difficulties to perform previously learned motor activities or apraxia, or they will have difficulties to plan or organize everyday tasks, such as like pay the bill or like prepare the meals, for example, yeah, like that. So simple activities, even the simple activities is difficult for them. Yeah, and sometimes their personality may change. They will be more irritable, like more frequently become agitated, and so on. So this is called dementia, in which the activities of daily living is impaired. Next. Yeah, this is actually the continuum period from the preclinical symptoms to the mild cognitive impairment to dementia, and the last one is actually Alzheimer's disease, because Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia. So the graph is inclined more sharply than the graph for the normal aging. In the normal aging, the memory will decline, but the the inclination angle is not as sharp as in the Alzheimer's or in the dementia process. Next. Yeah, so this is the last one, is about the depression. Actually, some people with depression can also have memory impairment, but in this case, we call it pseudo dementia, not really dementia actually, but due to the depression. So that's why they cannot make new learning memory, because in the depression patient, their attention is disturbed. So because if the attention is disturbed, then they cannot make new learning memory. Yeah, so that's why in people with depression, sometimes if you ask them about anything happen in their surrounding, they cannot remember it because their attention is disrupted, and then the process of storing the memory from the short term into the long term is also impaired. Yeah, and sometimes the patient with depression will have loss of appetite and psychomotor slowing and any other thing. But remember, this is not true dementia, but it is sometimes can be called pseudo dementia. Okay, I think that's all. Yeah, okay. Maybe that's all, and I will give the full time to Dr. Meida, yeah, for next session.
Okay, we still have 10 minutes before 2:20. Okay, if you have any question, you can ask directly, or maybe you can write in the chat box. Silakan, Dek. Bahasa Indonesia, bahasa Inggris boleh ya, Dr. Pras, Dr. Amel. Oke, silakan. Please, Vianney.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to ask regarding about anterograde and retrograde amnesia. There are some clinical cases in which that patients after having amnesia can obtain their memories back. In what way does that happen? Thank you.
Okay, maybe for Dr. Amelia.
Yeah, okay, I will answer first, but Dr. Pras and Dr. Meida can also add. So thank you, Fiona, for your question. Actually, this question is more related to the clinical process, but it's okay because you still need to understand about this. So for patient with amnesia, either with retrograde or anterograde, eventually they will get out their information, their memory back, actually, for most cases. But there are still some cases that they cannot, even after some years pass, they cannot recollect their memory back. Yeah, because it depends on how large the injury is. For example, if the accident happened in your brain, but it affect much larger areas in your brain. For example, the frontal lobe, the temporal lobes, and also the parietal lobes in both hemisphere, right and left. So it means in this patient, the recovery process will be like not 100%, we can say it. Yeah, because the larger area the injury is, then the more difficult to improve. Yeah, and if the like a dominant area is impaired, the dominant area, dominant hemisphere, I mean the left one. Yeah, if the left one is impaired, then mostly the patient will be difficult to remember any memory related to the verbal one. For example, memory related to what others say, or what have anything related to the sentence or related to the word, or any verbal information that being kept as a memory. But if the injury is located more in the right side of the brain, for example, in the right hemisphere or in the right temporal lobe, for example, then the memory will be impacted, is much more related to the visual-spatial process. For example, any information related to how you understand, for example, the shape or the location or the navigation. For example, usually you know how to go to the in Jogja, for example, Tempo de Gelato, for example. You exactly remember how to go there. But after the patient got the injury in the right side, they cannot remember how to go there, because in the right side of the brain, it is important for navigation system and the visual spatial process. That's why it will be more difficult for them to recollect this information related to this process. But in memory related to another process, it can be recollect easily. Yeah. So the main factors that can influence how the patient can fully recover or not is one, how large the area of injury is, and the second one, which part of the brain is involved, and the second one also, the third one is also the age. The younger the patient is, then the more easier for them to become fully improved than the elder one. And then the other thing is actually the education process, because for those with higher education, it means their brain have higher reserve capacity. Reserve capacity means the brain, usually in the people with higher education, the synapses being more rigorous, they have more synapses. So if they will be, if they'll try to learn new memory, yeah, it will be easier for them to store this memory as a long-term one. But for those people with the lower education background, their synapse is much lessened than those with higher education one, and the brain have lower reservation capacity than the higher one. So that's why usually it will be challenging for us, the doctors, to try to stimulate the memory for the patient in elder patient and low education background. Yeah, sometimes it can also influence. Yeah, so actually that's all that we can try to take a look before we deliver what kind of stimulation process that we can give to this patient. Yeah, but basically every patient with amnesia, we can still stimulate their memory by giving any cognitive stimulation process. Yeah, so like a puzzle or anything, what's that, work task that can enhance their memory performance. there are some kinds of memory, enhancing memory. You already have the practicum, right? Enhancing memory, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So for example, yeah. So any strategy, for example, association and then repetition, kind of that. So those type of activity is delivered to stimulate or enhance your memory process. Yeah. Maybe Dr. Pras or Dr. Meida have another information.
I think it's clear enough.
Yeah. Okay. So there are several factors, that can affect the result of the treatment. Just like what Dr. Amel said about the previous conditions, it also have influence in patient conditions. Yeah. Okay. Is there any question?
Actually, there's one more question from
Private
Paras.
message.
Yeah. Okay. I just
Okay.
know today. Yeah. So this is from Faras. She asked, she would like to know about the case of dementia. So in some clinical cases, there are some patients that regain a memory in the middle of the disease, but it will disappear again. And it's called terminal lucidity. So why does the terminal lucidity happen and why the patient didn't permanently regain their memory? Okay, so maybe I will try to answer first, and maybe Dr. Meida and Dr. Pras, if you have anything more to add. Okay, thank you, Faras, for your question. So in dementia, actually, we don't have any term about terminal lucidity in dementia cases. For the lucidity, or sometimes we call it lucid interval, it's usually it is applied to the case of the amnesia, amnestic syndrome. For example, after brain injury, there is the contusion or any hemorrhage in your brain, and then the patient will suddenly unconscious, and then after unconscious, they will have loss of their memory, and then after that they can regain again. So sometimes this is called like lucid interval. But for the dementia, if this Alzheimer's disease, though there is no in a terminology called terminal lucidity, but if you talk about the fluctuating memory function, it can happen to dementia in the Lewy body one. So yeah, I know this is more advanced, but just a brief explanation about this. So for dementia itself, actually, it cannot, it can be caused by Alzheimer's, the most common form, but the other one, it can also be caused by another disease called Lewy body. So in Lewy body dementia, their memory function is fluctuative. Sometimes they are in normal condition, and then sometimes they will decline in the worst part. Then after that, it can be normal again. So this fluctuation of memory impairment or with another cognitive function is because there is a alpha-synuclein mutation in their brain. So there will be like we call it like a toxin in their brain, and it will eventually affect your brain function. Yeah. But we cannot, we don't say it terminal lucidity. We just say it is terminal memory impairment. Yeah. Although the process is fluctuation. Yeah. And why the patient didn't permanently regain their memory? Yeah, because this kind of dementia actually is due to the degenerative disease. As you know, the term of degenerative disease means the processes happen every day, every second, still there in your brain. We cannot halt it. We cannot stop it. We can just give some medication to slow down the progressing of the symptom, but we cannot stop the etiology. That's why it is called degenerative disease. There is still there in your brain, still process, still disturb your memory and disrupt your function. Yeah. So for this kind of neurodegenerative disease, this is actually the process of impairment in the neuron, and usually happen in the middle age to elderly. Yeah, but sometimes it can also be happen in the young onset one, but it's much more rare. I think maybe that's all. I hope you understand. Or Dr. Pras or Dr. Meida, you have another comment?
We can see our student is so eager to learn about clinical condition, yeah, Dr. Amel.
Yeah, maybe due to the pandemic, or maybe they sometimes have kind of memory loss for just like a temporary.
Yeah. Okay, because of time, maybe we should close the session, Dr. Amel, Dr. Pras.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we close the session, maybe we can pray based on our belief and religion. Pray begin.